Felix Johnson scrubbed at the teakwood deck of the yacht like his life depended on it because, honestly, it sort of did. The Miami sun was brutal, his shirt clung to his back, and his hands had gone raw weeks ago. But the pay was decent, and decent kept the lights on and his little girl, Elodie, in ballet class. He glanced over his shoulder toward the edge of the marina where his 6-year-old sat on a folding chair in the shade, coloring in a sketchbook and sipping from a juice pouch. Her blonde curls bounced every time she looked up to wave at him. "Almost done, Peanut," he called, and she gave him a thumbs up with a grin that made his exhaustion worth it. "Careful with that section," a smooth voice said behind him. Felix looked up, startled. A woman in a crisp white dress and oversized sunglasses stood at the top of the yacht steps, one hand resting on the chrome rail. She didn't look like someone who belonged to the crew. No, this woman looked like she belonged in a magazine, poised, polished, with the kind of presence that made people turn their heads. "Sorry," Felix muttered, dropping back to his knees. "Didn't know anyone was on board." She tilted her head, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, but there was something curious in them too. "You're not part of my crew." "I'm not. Just contracted to clean the deck twice a week," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You the owner?" Her lips curved slightly. "Something like that." He stood, brushing off his jeans. "Sorry again. I'll be done in 5. "What's your name?" she asked, stepping closer. "Felix. Felix Johnson." She nodded slowly. "I'm Fallon Castell. It's my yacht." "Ah." The name clicked. Fallon Castell, shipping empire heiress turned tech entrepreneur. Billionaire. One of those Forbes featured types. And here he was, dripping sweat, shirt stained, probably reeking of bleach and deck polish. "You bring your daughter to work?" she asked, glancing toward Elodie. "Only when her sitter cancels last minute," Felix said, suddenly self-conscious. "She just sits and draws. Doesn't bother anyone." "She's adorable," Fallon said, her tone softer. "What's her name?" "Elodie." Fallon gave a small smile. "Pretty name." Felix nodded awkwardly, unsure why she was still standing there. Most yacht owners didn't even look at the cleaning crew, let alone talk to them. "I was going to have lunch brought on board," she said after a pause. "You and Elodie should join me. My chef makes a great grilled cheese." Felix blinked. "That's really kind, but I wouldn't want to, I insist," she said, already walking toward the lounge area. "You can't say no to grilled cheese." He looked at Elodie. She was already hopping off her chair, eyes wide with excitement. So that's how Felix found himself sitting in a sun-drenched lounge on a billion-dollar yacht, watching his daughter giggle as a private chef placed a tiny plate of grilled cheese and fruit in front of her. Fallon sat across from him, legs crossed, sipping iced tea like this was completely normal. "You're a single dad?" she asked casually, picking at a salad. "Yeah. Since Elodie was 2. Must be hard." "It is," he admitted. "But she's everything to me." "I can see that," she said, watching him. "You're different than most of the men I meet. Because I smell like bleach and desperation?" That made her laugh, really laugh, not the polite kind. "Because you're real." He didn't know what to say to that, so he focused on his sandwich. They talked for almost an hour. About Elodie's love of drawing, about how Fallon grew up sailing with her father before he passed, about why Felix left his job as a carpenter to take any gig he could find when bills piled up and daycare costs got out of control. She didn't pity him. She listened. Asked questions. Genuinely seemed to care. When they stepped off the yacht later that afternoon, Fallon handed Elodie a tiny sketchbook and a pack of colored pencils tied with a ribbon. "For your next masterpiece," she said with a wink. Elodie beamed. "Thank you." Fallon turned to Felix. "Same time Thursday?" He hesitated. "I wasn't scheduled to come back this week." "You are now," she said simply. That night, after Elodie had gone to bed, Felix sat on the couch staring at the sketchbook she'd already half filled. He didn't know what Fallon's deal was, or why a woman like her would pay attention to someone like him. But the way she looked at him like he wasn't invisible had done something to him. Something dangerous. And exciting. He told himself it didn't matter. That he'd finish his contract, get paid, and move on like always. But 2 days later he found himself back on that yacht, shirt freshly washed, Elodie's hand in his, and his heart thudding harder than it should have been. Because Fallon Castell wasn't just a billionaire. She was starting to feel like a storm he wasn't ready for. "Do you always carry a toolbox to lunch?" Fallon asked, her voice dry as she leaned against the yacht's railing, watching Felix hoist the battered metal case onto the deck. He glanced up, surprised to find her already there. She wore a navy blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, barefoot, one ankle crossed over the other. The sun caught the gold chain around her neck, and her hair was pinned up, a few strands loosened by the salt air. "Lunch wasn't the plan," he said, adjusting the strap of the canvas bag on his shoulder. "I was going to fix the sink in the galley." "Your crew chief mentioned it." "Ah," she said, pushing herself upright. "That must be why I found water dripping onto my Italian olives. If I had a nickel for every time I've ruined someone's olives," he muttered. Fallon's laugh was low and quick, not the poised kind he'd heard from glossy women at yacht clubs, but genuine in its surprise. "You're impossible to predict." "That's probably not a compliment," he said, kneeling beside the cabinet under the sink and flipping it open. "It's not a complaint either." Fallon crouched beside him, close enough that he caught the scent of citrus and salt. "So what did you do before you were fixing sinks and scrubbing teak?" "I worked with my hands," he said, pulling out a rusted coupling. "Built furniture. Refinished antique doors. That sort of thing." "Why stop?" He hesitated, flicked a glance toward where Elodie sat with one of the stewardesses at the back of the boat, carefully assembling a model of a lighthouse. "Because I couldn't afford to be picky. Work like that doesn't pay fast enough when rent's due and your kid outgrows her shoes in a month." Fallon looked at him, and this time she didn't fill the silence with small talk. After a moment she said, "I have a place in Coconut Grove. The kind of place that looks terrible without real wood pieces. Maybe I could commission something." He tightened a bolt. "You don't need to offer me charity." "I wasn't," she said, her tone even. "I just don't like mass-produced furniture." He sat back on his heels. "You'd let a guy with calloused hands and a beat-up pickup truck build you something for your millionaire mansion?" "Billionaire," she corrected. "And yes. Especially that guy." He stared at her, unsure if she was being serious. But there was no trace of irony in her expression. She stood again and walked to the edge of the deck, watching the horizon. "You know, I used to think it was a strength to keep people out. That control equaled safety." Felix slid the wrench into his case. "Doesn't it?" "It equals loneliness," she said, not turning around. He didn't know what to say to that, so he shut the toolbox. Later, as the sun dipped lower and cast long shadows over the marina, Fallon asked if they wanted to join her at the dockside cafe near the harbor. "Just a quick bite," she said. "There's a table that overlooks the water. I go when I need air." Elodie looked at him with wide eyes, holding her little lighthouse in both hands. "Can we, Daddy?" He hesitated. "Only if Fallon doesn't mind kids at her table." Fallon turned to Elodie. "I'd be offended if you didn't come." The cafe was quiet, private, with linen napkins and flickering candles already set at each table. A host led them to a corner spot by the water, where the orange sky reflected off the rippling tide. Felix helped Elodie into her seat and took the one across from Fallon. The waiter came, and without even glancing at the menu, she ordered grilled sea bass, a citrus salad, and hot chocolate for Elodie. "You come here a lot," Felix said when the waiter left. "Only when I need to remember who I am." "And who's that?" Her eyes locked onto his, serious. "Someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore." He didn't answer. The food came, and the conversation turned to lighter things. Fallon asked Elodie about her model and promised to show her the lighthouse near Key Biscayne one weekend. Elodie lit up, already planning what she'd pack. When the check came, Felix reached for his wallet, but the waiter was already gone. "I didn't even see him take it," he said. "I told him ahead of time," Fallon said simply. "You're my guests." Felix leaned back, folding his arms. "You're not used to hearing no, are you?" Fallon's eyes sparkled with something unreadable in the candlelight. "Not when I'm right." As they walked back to the parking lot, Elodie dancing ahead of them with her lighthouse tucked under one arm, Fallon slowed her pace beside him. "I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow," she said. 3 days. Meetings, a charity gala, the usual." He nodded, unsure why she was telling him. "But I'd like to see you when I get back," she added. "Both of you." He looked at her, at the way the breeze tugged at the loose strands of her hair, at the fire behind her calm. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. "Because I don't want to keep living a life that looks perfect on paper but feels hollow in reality," she said. "And you? You don't seem hollow." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. She reached out, touched his forearm lightly. "Don't disappear while I'm gone." Then she turned and walked toward her car, heels clicking softly against the pavement. Felix stood there for a long time, Elodie tugging at his hand, asking questions about stars and lighthouses and if billionaires wore pajamas like normal people. And he realized something terrifying. He didn't want Fallon Castell to be just a passing whirlwind. He wanted her to come back. The first thing Felix noticed when he stepped onto the yacht again was that Fallon hadn't returned alone. 3 men in tailored suits stood near the helm, their voices low, clipped corporate types. One of them had a tablet in his hand, and another was looking over a sheaf of documents spread across the teak table. Fallon stood in the middle, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Felix paused at the edge of the deck, Elodie's hand in his. She tugged gently. "Are they mad?" she whispered. "No," he said, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "They're just business people. Probably more interested in numbers than people." He felt Fallon's eyes on him before she spoke. "You came," she said, stepping away from the group. She wore a slate blue blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders this time, and there was something different in her face, tension, maybe. Or fatigue carefully disguised. "You said not to disappear," Felix said. "So I didn't." Her gaze slid to Elodie. "Hey, explorer. Ready for your art lesson in the Sky Lounge?" Elodie nodded, already bouncing on her toes. Fallon gestured to one of the stewards, a tall, soft-spoken woman named Diana. "Diana will take you up. I set out watercolors this time." Once Elodie was gone, Fallon turned back to Felix. "I need 5 minutes. Walk with me." He followed her down the deck toward the bow where they were out of earshot of the others. The wind tugged at her sleeves, and her heels clicked lightly on the wood. "I shouldn't have brought those men here today," she said without preamble. "It wasn't fair to you. You don't owe me explanations," Felix said. "I do," she said, stopping. "Because they weren't here for business." "Not really." He frowned. "Then what?" "They were here to talk me out of something." Her voice was quieter now. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Castell Tech." Felix blinked. "Why?" "Because I hate it." She looked out at the water. "It started as mine, then it got bigger, and then it stopped being about ideas and started being about quarterly returns and board pressure and keeping the sharks fed. I woke up one morning and realized I was building someone else's vision." He didn't know what to say. He'd never met someone who could walk away from an empire. "I want to create again," she said. "Not manage. I want to build things with my hands, be around people who don't measure worth in headlines." "And they're trying to stop you?" he asked. "They think I'm throwing away my legacy," she said. "But it never really felt like it was mine, not after a while." She turned to him now, her eyes steady. "I'm telling you this because I don't want you to think I'm playing some kind of game. I don't invite people into my life lightly, Felix. He studied her for a long moment. You're not the only one who's scared of starting over. She exhaled, and for the first time, he saw the wall she'd always kept perfectly polished crack. Come with me, she said suddenly. Tonight. He blinked. Where? To the gala in Chicago. I have one more night of pretending before I'm free of all this. I don't want to do it alone. He stared at her. You want me to go to a black tie event with billionaires and tech moguls? I want you to be yourself in a room full of people who forgot how to be, she said. I'll take care of everything. You just show up. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elodie can stay with Diana, she added. She adores her. My jet leaves in 2 hours. He looked toward the Sky Lounge window where Elodie was hunched over paper, tongue between her teeth as she concentrated. She's never spent the night away from me. She won't be far, Fallon said. And you'll be back in the morning. He hesitated, every instinct telling him he didn't belong in that world. But Fallon was watching him not with expectation, but with hope. I'll need a suit, he said finally. She smiled, and it lit up her whole face. Already handled. The jet was unlike anything Felix had ever seen. Cream leather seats, crystal decanters, and a quiet hum that barely registered once they were in the air. Fallon sat across from him, legs tucked under her, wearing a deep emerald gown that shimmered like glass under the cabin lights. You're staring, she said. I've just never seen anything like this. I have, she said, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. And I'd trade all of it for one night of normal. Then why bring me to the least normal event imaginable? Because you're the only thing tonight that feels real. Chicago greeted them with wind and lights and a driver waiting in a sleek black car. Felix changed in the back a midnight blue tux that fit like it had been made for him. Fallon watched him emerge, her gaze lingering for a beat too long. The gala was held in a glass atrium suspended above the city skyline. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd while a string quartet played something classical and expensive sounding. Cameras flashed, but Fallon didn't flinch. Felix stayed close, unsure of what to do with his hands, his posture, his entire existence. But Fallon kept a hand lightly on his arm, grounding him. An older man in a silver tie approached. Fallon, I hear you're stepping away. I am, she said evenly. Pity. You were the only one in that room who wasn't a coward. Felix tensed, but Fallon only smiled. Then maybe it's time someone else learned to be brave. The man looked at Felix curiously. And you are? Someone who doesn't care about your stock prices, Felix said, surprising even himself. Fallon's laugh was soft, but there was pride in it. They danced later, beneath a cascade of white lights. Felix had never waltzed before, but Fallon guided him, her fingers warm in his. For a moment, it was just the two of them, the rest of the world blurred around the edges. You were amazing tonight, she whispered. I was terrified. So was I. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman behind the empire. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the girl who'd once sailed with her father and still wanted something simple and wild and real. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said before he could stop himself. Fallon's breath caught, but she didn't look away. Then don't disappear, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. They stood that way for a long time, the music folding around them like a spell. But nothing about this night was finished. Because the moment they returned to the hotel suite Fallon had reserved, her phone rang. And everything changed. Fallon's expression shifted the moment she answered the call. Felix watched the change, a subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her shoulders drew in slightly, like she was bracing for impact. I'll handle it, she said quietly, then hung up without elaborating. He stepped closer, tension rising in his chest. What's going on? She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she crossed to the window of the suite, staring out at the lights of Chicago shimmering in the glass like stars trapped beneath her feet. My legal team just got word. My uncle's contesting the restructuring papers I filed before stepping down. He's accusing me of breaching fiduciary duty and claims I'm mentally compromised. He's trying to block the transition and seize control of my shares. Felix blinked. Can he do that? He's on the board, she said, turning to face him. And he has enough influence to cause a delay. He can't stop me forever, but he can bury me in hearings and press leaks until I'm exhausted enough to walk away. He's betting you'll burn out. He's betting I'll give up, she said. And maybe I would have. A year ago, I might have let him have it all just to be done with the noise. But not now. No, she said, her voice steady. Not now. Felix stepped closer. Then we fight. She gave a quiet laugh, but it wasn't bitter. You say that like it's simple. I've fought for everything I have, he said. I know what it feels like to want something better for yourself and for the people you love. Don't let him steal that from you. She studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. By the time they returned to Miami the next morning, Elodie was waiting on the dock with her model lighthouse balanced in her arms and a proud grin on her face. Guess what? She said, running to Felix. Diana helped me make a whole marina out of paper boats. Fallon crouched beside her. I hope you saved one for me. I made 3, Elodie said, lifting the lighthouse. And this one's getting a dock next. Felix tousled her curls, then looked at Fallon. What happens now? I meet with my attorney, she said. And I make it very clear that I'm not stepping aside quietly. A week passed. Fallon kept her distance during the day, buried in meetings and filings, but every evening she called not out of obligation, but because she wanted to hear Elodie's stories about her crafts or what she'd drawn that day. And when she spoke to Felix, there was a softness that hadn't been there before. Not hesitation. Trust. On Friday, she showed up unannounced at the small apartment Felix rented above a closed-down pizzeria. He opened the door, surprised to find her standing there, a plain canvas bag in one hand, dressed in jeans and a white blouse. I brought dinner, she said. And paint. He stepped aside, confused. Paint? For your workshop, she said, stepping inside. You said you'd started clearing out the space again. He blinked, then grinned. You remembered that? I did. She helped him carry the food up to the rooftop, where he'd been slowly transforming the old storage unit into something resembling a studio. The walls were still bare, but there was a worn workbench pushed against one side and a few sketches pinned near the window. They ate cross-legged on the floor, passing containers of takeout between them while the sky turned from gold to violet. Fallon dipped a brush into the paint, then reached for the nearest wall and drew a quick, uneven circle. What's that? Felix asked. A starting point, she said. Your space. Your rules. He took a brush and added a line beneath it. Feels like a pretty good place to begin. Later that night, after Elodie had gone to bed and the dishes were stacked in the sink, Fallon lingered by the window, looking out over the quiet street. I never told anyone this, she said. But when my father died, the first time I got behind the wheel of a boat without him, I panicked halfway through and turned around. I told everyone it was engine trouble. Felix leaned against the wall. You were scared. I was lost, she said. But I kept pretending I wasn't, until I couldn't tell the difference anymore. He crossed the room, standing in front of her. You're not lost now. No, she said, her voice soft. I'm not. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. This is for you. He opened it slowly. Inside was a formal commission agreement with Fallon's signature already at the bottom. You want me to build your dining table? And the chairs, she said. And the sideboard. And eventually, maybe the crib for the nursery I'll have one day. His throat tightened. You trust me with that? I trust you with more than that, Felix. He stepped forward, cupping her face in his palms. I think I've been falling for you since that first grilled cheese. You took too long to say it, she whispered, rising onto her toes. He kissed her, slow and certain, not because it was dramatic or impulsive, but because it was right. Weeks passed, and the chaos settled. Her uncle's legal challenge crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and shareholder support. Fallon officially stepped down and retained majority ownership of the company, but delegated control. Freedom on her terms. She spent her mornings at the marina, often in jeans and paint-splattered shirts, helping Felix restore old furniture and sketch new designs. Elodie had her own corner in the shop, where she painted lighthouses and told every customer that her daddy made magic with wood. And one afternoon, under a wide white tent near the water, Felix watched Fallon kneel beside Elodie and help her gather flowers for the ceremony. There were no headlines. No photographers. Just a few close friends, the sound of waves, and the faint scent of sea salt. When Fallon walked up the aisle toward him, barefoot in a sleeveless dress stitched with tiny pearls, Felix felt like the world had finally tilted into place. He didn't care that she was a billionaire. She'd chosen him and he'd chosen her back. And that made everything complete. Rain lashed the windows of the waterfront workshop as Felix adjusted the final panel of the walnut cabinet he'd been working on for over a week. The storm had rolled in quickly, draping the marina in a sheet of gray, but inside the shop, it was warm, the scent of sawdust and varnish filling the air. Fallon was perched on a stool near the back wall, sketching something in a thick notebook, sleeves rolled up, her hair neatly knotted. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it had settled into something comfortable, like background music they no longer needed to fill. "Would you ever open a storefront?" she asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Thought about it," Felix said, running a hand over the cabinet's edge. "But I'd want it to be more than a store. A space where people can see things being made. Learn how to build something themselves." She closed the notebook and met his eyes. "What if we did it together?" He set the sander down and turned toward her. "You mean? As partners?" "Yes," she said, standing. "Your vision. Your name on the door. But I help fund it. Quietly. No press. No shareholders. Just us building something that matters." He considered that. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. "I've spent my whole life being seen for what I own. I want to be part of something because of what I believe in." Felix walked to her, brushing his hands on a cloth before taking hers. "Then let's build it." Outside, lightning forked across the sky, but inside the storm felt like a backdrop to something steady, rooted. By spring, the storefront was real. It sat on a tree-lined street in Coral Gables, all glass and reclaimed wood, with Felix's name carved into a weathered sign above the door. Inside, the showroom flowed into an open workshop visible to anyone who walked in. A corner near the front was set up with small easels and art supplies, where kids could sketch while their parents browsed. Elodie had her own stool there, always covered in paint dots and glitter. She spent her afternoons helping customers pick out colors while Fallon met with local artisans, quietly building a network of people who believed in craftsmanship over mass production. One afternoon, as Felix finished installing a hand-carved bookshelf for a client, Fallon stepped through the workshop door holding a small leather-bound notebook. "This came in the mail today," she said, handing it to him. He opened it and froze. Inside were blueprints. Detailed, precise, and unmistakably his. The designs he had drawn years ago during nights when Elodie was just a baby and the world felt like it had closed in around him. Somehow, he thought they were lost when he moved apartments. But Fallon had quietly tracked down the old storage unit where he used to keep his things, and salvaged them. "I thought they deserved to be seen," she said softly. He looked up at her, emotion catching in his throat. "I can't believe you found these. I wanted to surprise you." "You did," he said, cupping her cheek with one calloused hand. "You always do." They hosted their first workshop that weekend. Parents and children lined long wooden tables, learning to sand, assemble, and stain their own simple pieces. Fallon taught a few of the older kids how to sketch their designs first, while Felix guided the others through the process. That night, after the last guest had gone and Elodie had fallen asleep on a pile of throw pillows beneath the bookshelf, Fallon leaned against the counter, watching Felix clean up. "I talked to my attorney yesterday," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay? I'm transferring the Castell family yacht to the educational sailing program we funded last month. They're turning it into a floating classroom." He set the hammer down. "You're letting it go?" "I don't need it anymore," she said. "I have what I want." He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. They stood there in the golden light, surrounded by wood shavings, drawings, and the faint scent of lavender from the candles Elodie insisted on lighting each day. Months passed, and the shop flourished. People came from all over to take part in the hands-on experience, drawn by the authenticity of it all. Fallon never sought the spotlight, but word of what they were building spread anyway. One clear morning, as they opened the doors for the day, Fallon reached into her coat pocket and handed Felix a small envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, the 3 of them standing in front of the storefront, Elodie mid-laugh, Fallon leaning into him, his arm wrapped around her waist. On the back, in Fallon's neat handwriting, were the words, "Our beginning. Our forever." He looked up, eyes meeting hers. "Marry me," he said, the words falling out without a plan, without preamble. Her eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. Yes. They were married beneath an oak tree in a small park near the shop. No press. Just friends, neighbors, and children running barefoot through the grass. Fallon wore a simple dress with sleeves that danced in the breeze. Elodie held the rings and insisted on giving a speech that made everyone cry. They danced under string lights. Ate cake from a local bakery. And when the sun dipped behind the trees, Fallon leaned her head on Felix's shoulder and whispered, "This is the life I never knew I wanted." He kissed her temple. "And it's only just begun." Years passed. The shop expanded into a second location. Elodie grew into a teenager with a sketchbook always in hand and a gift for designing furniture even her father admitted was better than his. Fallon began teaching part-time at local schools, helping kids discover their creativity without ever mentioning her last name. They built furniture. They built a life. And most importantly, they built a home filled with laughter, paint stains, and unconditional love. Nothing grand. Nothing staged. Just real. And forever.